you are using an insecure device, you actually pose a threat to other users on the internet. What do I mean? In some incidents, and one was mentioned this morning by Dr. Bekele, there was an attack 2 or 3 years ago, which was called the Mirai attack. And what it was hundreds of thousands of compromised devices like printers, cameras, home Wi-Fi devices. They were compromised and used to attack a big DNS company called Dyn. And what happened was many people lost, they could not access some of the devices, some of the online devices, online services, because the DNS was not working. And each, there are a lot of common examples of compromised devices being used to attack other devices on the internet. So when we talk about outward security, what we mean is the risks your device presents to people who are actually not on your network. They could even be on the other side of the world, but because it's an insecure device that you're using and the internet is one big interconnected network, we could actually be affected by insecure devices that are not even in our own country. So inward security in terms of what we mean in terms of inward security and what are the risks. So of course, there's personal data that could be compromised. If you use an insecure device, I've given there an example of a smart camera that is using default username and password. If someone joins your network, they could, your privacy has been compromised. We also we heard about smart devices, smart watches this morning. In future, and actually it's already started, some of these devices could be used for measuring our health, blood pressure, heart rate, and so on. If this information is sent in an insecure fashion, there's a risk there that our privacy information, again, could be exposed. Smart home device like televisions. I don't know if you saw this story a couple of years back, that smart televisions, they come with microphones, they have cameras, and one or two manufacturers, as you watched the television, it was also watching you. And, your conversations are being recorded, your video. And this is another example of, a device that could, it's innocuous. It doesn't look like a dangerous device, it's a television, but it's actually being used to record what you're doing. And something that's coming now, and it's looks like it's gathering a lot of pace, smart vehicles. These are vehicles which can drive themselves. Some of them are already being connected to the internet. These are vehicles and there were researchers who did a study, and they did a live test of, can they actually disable the brakes on a vehicle that is moving? And I don't know if you saw that, but it was a very interesting case a few years ago. So these devices are coming into our markets. There are some security risks. They could be as simple as, you've lost maybe a few photos to a third party, or it could be as bad as your smart vehicle, or, something that you're using to transport, something, and it fails because someone else has compromised that device. Now, what are the economics? What's the challenge of IoT security? Strong security is expensive. You need expertise. You need people who understand it to implement it. And because of this and the rush to be the first in the market with a device, there's a lot of competition in the market. Everyone wants to sell the fast camera, the fast smartwatch. So in that rush and in the need to save costs, some of these devices come to us without proper security. There's also suppliers who are trying to implement security in terms of, when you buy a device, it'll be labeled, maybe it'll have a certain mark that says this is a secure device because so and so and so have reviewed it and they've said that it's a safe device. And we're going to hear more about that when we talk about framework, IoT framework document. So very briefly, a few ways IoT security can be improved. There's the collaborative approach. We're going to hear about this more as well in the afternoon. Sharing information. devices that have been compromised. You as a user, you can also mention that I use this device and it was a compromised device. As a vendor, if you're a vendor or you're a manufacturer, you owe it to your customers to tell them that so and so this device has a bug or a security loophole, and that you're doing something to fix it. Another way to improve IoT security is strong policy controls. So, for example, the devices that we use, they need to have encryption on by default. They need to have secure passwords, not just default username and passwords. And of course, there's a big user education that needs to be done. Users need to be taught how to identify secure devices, how to report when they encounter a device that's not safe. Consumers, we as the consumers need to demand that secure devices come into our environment. We don't allow insecure devices to come in. So I'll close and ask this question: how do we improve all this? How can we improve IoT security? And as you gather your thoughts, those are just 5 ideas there. We're going to hear a few examples, but just think of those and think about what could be done in each. There's the research and innovation. The previous session, we saw that there's a lot of innovation being done in terms of the e-health we saw and the transportation. There's a big role for open standards, these devices to interact with each other and be interoperable, certification and trust marks. How can we as consumers identify an insecure device and stay away from it? And then policy and regulation and frameworks and best practices, we're going to hear more about that, but there's a big component of that in IoT security. So I'd like to stop here and hand over to Munyaradzi, who will talk about a project they did in Zimbabwe and how they brought in security into that. So let me just put it.
Okay. So yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Munyaradzi Matunhu is my name from the Zimbabwe chapter. I'm going to present to you a project that we actually did and it worked back home. It's a proof of privacy. Well, it's not a term that actually certified somewhere, no. It's a term that we thought was appropriate for our project, since we were trying to prove that you can actually get some privacy through using these IoT devices. So we'll start by, we'll talk about some use cases, scenarios where IoT devices have been breached or they've been suspected to be sending information to some other entities that are not the expected destinations. We'll also we'll also talk about the idea that we used. We normally want to use the disruptive IoT approaches. So that's what we did. And then we'll talk about all the procedures that we did so that we can share the information. We can actually collaborate. Everything, I'll give it to you at the end of this slide. So most of you have heard about connected homes. What is it? What's happening? Most of you don't even know what's happening. You simply hear that you're monitoring your house. You can actually get video feedback, but what exactly is happening? So that's what's in that picture there. I took one company, Nescam. What they do is they manufacture IoT cameras and they sell it to you. There are many, many different companies out there. Nescam, Philips Hue, Tracker, Bravo, Google, you can name them, many of them. But what these companies do now, they have their camera, they sell it to you, but for you to use it, you have to buy it with their gateway. That's where the problem comes. You buy it with their gateway. The gateway, you have no access to. You don't even know what's happening behind. All they tell you is you get feedback of your house. What's happening behind? So that's the user there. You have access to your camera, which you simply install. In the gateway, actually gives you feedback through video feeds and everything. You can't do nothing about it. So that poses a threat. You are using something that you don't know what's happening behind. So with that, there have been cases. With that, there have been cases around the world where such incidents have been breached. Make it next slide. So I went over the net, just did some research. On the first instance there, a Chinese company called Hikvision was actually contracted by the US government to install its cameras on quite many embassies. But then they were, I'm not for it, I'm not supporting it or whatever, but I'm simply saying it happened. So some people went on to say, what if they're monitoring us? What if they're sending data back to China? There were questions about that. And so many disagreements came afterwards about the system not being private. That's why they say IoT home surveillance and FUD. There is fear, uncertainty, and there is doubt. Whenever you purchase these things, it doesn't matter whether you know exactly how IoT works. If you know IoT works, still the FUD exists, because you know how people can actually utilize the IoT devices. There can be warfare of IoT devices. So you actually get scared. So it's for everyone, that FUD. Whether you're a novice, you're a layman, or an expert, it always exists. In the other use case there was for Swan. They also manufacture their own cameras. And it occurred at one point that an end user was getting feedback from a camera that's not his. So it's actually that end user that ended up reporting back to Swan to say, I'm getting feedback, but I don't know where it's coming from. So it was coming from another user who had bought that camera. But then the required user was not getting the feedback. So there was a problem there. But the users didn't know. If this user was receiving feedback, didn't report, he was gonna get that feedback probably for the rest of their lives. Do something do something bad with it or whatever. So that's where we discovered that there's a vulnerability. All of these IoT devices, they come with their own gateways, which communicate with the cloud. So there is an IoT device, the gateway, which bridges to the IoT device, and then the communication is like that. It's closed to the end user. You don't know what's happening there. So there's no privacy. You are just using something that you can't trust. And again, for instance, you want to install a Google voice recorder in your house. You want to install a Hikvision camera. All these devices, they come from different manufacturers. So if you are to run them in your house, it means each device has its own gateway. So if you have 5 different devices doing different things, they cannot understand each other. They cannot work together. So each device is working independently. And that becomes cumbersome. I mean, you have 5 devices, 5 gateways doing communications. You don't even know what's happening. So we actually discovered that that was another vulnerability there. So our approach here, we just summarized the whole thing. These devices, we realized that they operate in what we call a black box. Like, you can't see what's happening. So that's where we go on to say that it becomes cumbersome to monitor the devices. 5 devices, 5 gateways that you don't even know what they're doing. That's when you come up with the idea of the what, which is the Mozilla Web of Things. The Mozilla Web of Things is a gateway. Just like these gateways that these guys bring with their devices. It is a powerful gateway, but it's more powerful now in that it's customizable to how you want it to operate. So we've been following the IRTF guys. These guys, they stress more on semantic, IoT semantic. They want IoT to have a meaning. and also interoperability. Like what you've just realized, the 5 devices that you've installed in your house, they can't operate together. Each one is operating differently. But this is one house. You want everything to be on the same platform. That's when we next slide. We went up and came up with this idea. So now there you can see we have 3 devices. And in that picture, we are assuming the 3 devices are coming from 3 different manufacturers. We were supposed to be having 3 different blocks going up and down, right? A device, gateway, and then the cloud. The communication is supposed to be in stacks like that. But now we are having one central point of communication. We brought the Mozilla, the Web of Things gateway, that we actually can customize. Then we threw away their gateways. It doesn't matter whether they were spying or whatever, we don't want it. We create our own. Now the beauty about the Mozilla gateway, it can be redeveloped. It can be customized. It actually allows you to create your own APIs to operate the way you want. So what we did is we incorporated the blockchain technology. I'm sure most of you are quite aware what it is. Maybe just to explain a little, it's all about recording data, but the data is stored in different devices and in chunks, right? So those chunks, we can simply describe them as blocks. In the way they communicate from one chunk to another, it now becomes the chain. That's where the word blockchain comes from. It's secure, very, very secure. At the moment, I would like to believe it's unhackable. I don't know, but it's very secure. The cryptocurrency guys, they are using it. Otherwise, if it was hackable, the system would have failed long time ago. So it's not hackable at the moment. So we use that and we incorporated the Hyperledger. It's an intelligent ledger that's actually capable of recording activities within your system. And the beauty about Hyperledger is you can actually customize it as well, and you can actually query it. We added a query section where you actually query what's happening in your system, who's communicating, who's sending information where. So, like for instance, you know, you have a camera, it's supposed to be sending information to a certain cloud. Such information is going to a certain IP address. If you see a second IP address coming through, then you know something's not well. Whether you're in Japan, you're in America, you can actually send a signal to shut the system. So you actually have power over your system. The Hyperledger, where it says compose a playground there, we call it the playground. You can actually play around with it. You query, you actually check the data that's been stored in the database. So now you have ultimate control over your system. Now the cameras as well, they can work together in one system, unlike the default that you are having 5 different gateways. Each of them, you don't know what's happening, you don't trust, you just bought them for the sake of IoT. Now you have trust, now you have privacy because it's your own thing. You know exactly what's happening in your system. So in a nutshell, that's exactly what we did. We removed the 5 different guys here, the gateways. We put one guy that we trust, which is the Mozilla gateway, incorporated with blockchain and Hyperledger. So that's how we came up with the project. And we actually managed to monitor the system in real time. You're getting information, you're getting video feed, it actually communicates with you through Twitter. You can actually tell what's happening in your house and control it. So, yeah, next time. So just to continuation, why did we choose blockchain? I think I've explained already the power of blockchain. By storing data in those chunks, it becomes no one owns that data. It's stored in different areas. No one owns it. Unlike data being stored in a server. If the server is hacked, the system is down. With blockchain, you cannot know where the data is. It's just everywhere. So you cannot hack the system. That's where we're trying to prove that there is some privacy and provenance in there within our project. So just to close it up, we are making a call for collaboration. As you can see, this is a work in progress. Our code is available for you. You can actually view it, use it for your own, edit it. Even the customized instructions, we've actually brought them up for you to share. So you can actually customize, redevelop the application to your own needs. And there's a write-up as well with step-by-step procedures, how you go about it. So it's all in that. So yeah, this is the end of the presentation, and thank you.
Thank you very much for that presentation. Very interesting. And thank you also for sharing your work, that it's open source and we can all go and see it. So before we go to the next presentation, I am sure there are a few questions on that presentation. Do you have any questions on the floor? Okay, so ECOWAS, the gentleman at the back. So 2 questions.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Chair. Generally, I don't ask questions on contributions. Can you hear it here? I've realized that the ISOC chapters are carrying out projects in their respective states and countries. And since this morning, we have been talking about awareness raising. And I believe one of the very first activities that these chapters in the different countries should do is education and awareness raising on IoTs. That should be step number 1. He gave a precise example. If you use various gateways, that will be heavy. So they developed a single gateway for various devices. So we need to draw the attention of users, of the different stakeholders to how to better use devices even before they buy them. So one of the activities that ISOC should do should be that sensitization or awareness raising. Once this kind of awareness raising has been carried out, the users are already well educated. When they go to buy a product, they at least have some basic information on what they are buying. Whereas this morning we heard that many users do not even know the dangers of the devices they buy and they use. So indeed, it is a contribution that I just want to make here. Thank you for your kind attention.
Kofi, I think Dr. Bekele wanted to respond.
Thank you. I would like to continue on what Dr. Kofi has said. In fact, the Internet Society had an objective for this year to increase awareness on IoT security in Africa with our chapters, but also with our partners. So I know we have chapters in many countries in Africa, but we need more partners because, as you said, awareness comes first. So if there is any organization here who can work with us to increase the awareness, please come and talk to us. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I think there was another question at the back.
Okay, merci.
Thank you. In fact, I want to bounce back on the issue of security that the presenter spoke to. The presenter said the blockchain is an instrument that should help to protect personal data. And he said that the blockchain is indeed a tool that makes security a reality to the tune of about 90%. I would like that he should elaborate further on the proof of privacy that he described in relation to the blockchain, because he said that if you have a blockchain and there's an individual that has a proof of privacy, they can get information on whether they have privacy or not. Now, if we are establishing the blockchain and we don't understand who those that are going to be producing the chain, how are we going to perhaps have oversight over perhaps minors, for instance, that may also have access to the blockchain? And sometimes in Africa, we have problems of power and so on. So we may have blockchains that do not work because lack of energy. You said that the blockchain is a very dependable instrument for securing data. I'm very upbeat about that. Technology is good, but the way of achieving technology with the working conditions we have in Africa is really difficult. I hope we should be able to deploy technology fully so that we can harness its benefits. So I would like that you should provide further explanations so that I should understand this blockchain notion very well, because I'm trying to work there on. So I would like to have further clarifications there on. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I believe the question is towards the challenge of running blockchains in terms of power availability, consumption. Did I get that right? Okay, so in terms of the implementation that they've done, this is a private blockchain, one that does not require computational power to solve a problem. It's sort of an implementation that's different from how it's done on the cryptocurrency side. And the software he mentioned, Hyperledger, it's free open source software that you can actually install on 4 or 5 devices and link your own private blockchain. So it's not like it's very different from the way we understand the cryptocurrency one. So I just want to explain that, but you can add on.
Yeah, exactly. I think he has said it all. The Hyperledger is a private blockchain that you can actually customize. It's not the real blockchain that we use. I was just giving an example of how blockchain operates to say the data is not centralized, it's everywhere. But using that technology now, Hyperledger is something that's private, a private blockchain that you can customize and control to your own needs. Hence the privacy part.
Okay, are there any other questions or contributions from the floor? Okay, I think we can move on to the last presentation, which will be made by Robin Wilton from ISOC. So I'll just bring up your presentation.
Thank you, Kevin. While Kevin's doing that, I would just like to make a few thanks. First to the African Bureau for inviting me, and second to Mokhtar and his colleagues at the Commission. I know Mokhtar was here in the room earlier, and he's gone. One of the reasons why Mokhtar can come in and go is because is Auguste Yankee still in the room? No, he's left as well. Okay, Auguste does so much of the work to keep this team running smoothly, and that's probably why he had to run out now. But I'm very grateful to Auguste as well for help he's given, both setting this up and in the past as well. So I wanted to take a few minutes, and I think this will probably take about 20 minutes or so, and we'll have time for questions, to cover 3 topics. Have I got it? Okay. And on one more. Sorry, I have to put those slides in, otherwise the marketing guys come and beat me up. But I have to have the one in that says what ISOC's mission is. But I think most of you as chapter members probably know what ISOC's mission is. So I want to cover 3 topics fairly briefly. I know we've been given some examples already today of the potential risks from IoT. But as one of our earlier presenters said, things are always better with a story. So I'm going to give a couple more stories, and hopefully one or other of these stories that you hear will just stick, and that will be the one that makes you remember some of the things about IoT that you need to put into practice later. Then I have two sections, having outlined some aspects of the problem, I have two sections of the presentation that cover things that the Internet Society and its partners are doing in this space to work towards workable solutions. So I think, I've been in the IT industry now since 1984, and I've seen mainframes and mid-range computers and personal computers and mobile phones and devices, and there's always been, it's like watching the tide go in and out. Data flows towards the center, data flows out, data flows back in again. Processing does the same. So this cycle that we go through is I think, probably a perpetual. But it has a paradox, especially in the case of IoT, which is that the more distributed devices there are, the more data there is. Currently, the more that data is centralized. So actually connecting IoT devices, not just in your home, but to the cloud, which apps might be telling their cloud, in other words, their version of someone else's computer, oh, I'm sitting next door to Robin, and you don't know. But it knows because the devices are talking to each other, and one device is talking to home. So this rapid rise in the volume of centralized data is bound to have a profound impact on individual privacy. And that has social effects as well. We're often told that we live in the information society, but we're not so often reminded that that information is being used by others. And of course, there's a very powerful economic driver behind that use. This morning, the monetization of data was mentioned both in a question and in a presentation. That is a very powerful economic force, which we as individual consumers have great difficulty in influencing. So that's a little piece of the landscape. Can we go to the next one? Here's something a little bit more personal, and it starts with a question. Those of you who have children, would you pay a stranger to go into your child's bedroom? I don't think I would. But that's pretty much what happened with these connected toys. And I'm going to say connected, not smart. This is a habit that I'm trying to get into. Instead of saying a smartphone or a smartwatch or a smart toy, I try to say a connected toy, because they're not necessarily smart. They may be dumb, but they're connected. So what happened with these toys was, it was a fantastic idea. The parents or the grandparents of the child could leave a message on a server, and when the child squeezes the paw of the toy, they hear the message. So it's fantastic. When dad is away on business, he records a message saying, night, night, I'm thinking about you. And so when their child goes to bed, they squeeze the paw of the animal and they hear dad saying good night. Fantastic. Well, of course, the parents have to buy the toy for this to work. Then they have to pay for the subscription to the messaging service. And then it turned out the messaging service was not very secure. So in fact, there were two databases. One of them had all the subscription details in, the people who'd signed up to the service, so that had credit card information in. And the second database had all the messages from dad or grandma or Uncle Bill. And so both those databases got hacked. They weren't password secured, and one subscriber noticed when he went to the URL for his account, there was a number in there, 1015. And he thought, I wonder what 1016 is. So he changed the 5 to a 6, and he got the next record. and the next customer and the next customer. So he was nice. He didn't do anything with that. He told the company, but someone else found out and they weren't nice. So they copied the database, then they deleted the original. Then they called the company and said, would you like your database back? You can have it for only a few $1,000s. With the payment details in, and they started the same thing with the parents as well. And the other great thing about it was, because it's an IoT device, it has a controller. In this case, the controller was a phone, and it's just an unencrypted Bluetooth session. So your kid could be sitting on the bus with their cuddly which is pretty unpleasant. So this was just one retail product. Clearly, it's aimed at young children. Those compromises uncovered 800,000 accounts and profiles and photos and 2 million voice recordings. So that's quite a serious example, I think. And it's one that, for me at least, with children, really kind of gets to me. So some lessons from that. Security of the device wasn't designed in. Its communication to its controller was open. Security of the back end wasn't designed in. Second lesson, there's obviously a cost to that. They have to go in at the start. Second lesson, there's obviously a cost to this, but who did that cost fall on? It fell on the parents, presumably some of the children. So I think going forward, where there's a regulatory dimension, we have to be much better. As it happened, this company. Yes. When this was discovered and publicized, obviously their shares lost all their value, so they went out of business. But that's not an appropriate way for this kind of harm to be prevented. That kind of harm should be prevented earlier by the application of values to the whole design process for that product. But there is help there. This idea of value-based design it's not an old software and product design principle, but it is rapidly maturing. And there are some very good resources on value-based design that build ethics and privacy and security into the development process. Next one. So that was a consumer example. Now, why might governments care? Well, you may have seen some articles about fitness trackers that were used by many people, including some military personnel. This map here shows the personnel on a US military base somewhere not in the United States. And these are their jogging routes. These went up on a public heat map. So, and the same map was used by another guy to identify intelligence service personnel in Paris. He actually, because there were guys who used to go to the office in Paris in their work in the intelligence services. They would take their fitness tracker with them, and then maybe they'd jog somewhere near the office at lunchtime, or maybe they'd jog after work, and then they leave their fitness tracker on because they're no longer in the secure office, and they would drive home. So the location trail for their fitness tracker goes around and around their office and then to their house. So that's fantastic news for a government and its secret intelligence service, I think. Okay, so what's the problem with that links these two examples? And I think it is a problem of context. If you go into your child's bedroom, you know that you're in a personal and sensitive context. But by taking that connected toy into your child's bedroom, you brought something and someone from another context outside into your child's private bedroom. Here, I guess these service personnel probably thought, I work on a US base, I'm on a US base. If I go jogging, I'm jogging on a US base. They didn't expect that information to go out of that context and end up in a publicly searchable map on the internet. So many of our expectations about context can very easily and quickly be violated by the presence of connected objects. Next one. Okay, so one final one, and then I'll move on, sorry. Okay, so I've been talking about fitness trackers, maybe phones. How about something simpler, just a sensor? Presumably, an air quality sensor doesn't raise the same kind of issues. Yeah, well, you'd be surprised how personal that information can be. There was a company that installed carbon monoxide sensors in its meeting rooms. This is good. We don't like carbon monoxide. It's very bad for us. But those sensors, they found, could also give a CO2, carbon dioxide reading. So they thought, well, okay, we'll track CO2 levels as well. The carbon monoxide for safety and CO2 just because the sensor does it. Well, there's clinical data that shows that if you're sitting doing nothing, you have a given rate of breathing in and out, and so you have a given rate of producing CO2. So for a given room, if one person is sitting in that room doing nothing, this will be the CO2 level. If two people are sitting in the room doing nothing, CO2 level will be twice as high, and so on. If two people are in the room being active, actually maybe that's not a very polite example. So maybe it's a hotel gym. Maybe someone is taking exercise on the treadmill, and they're breathing a lot. The CO2 levels will go up. Okay, so I think what I've just illustrated there is that data which seems to be quite non-sensitive can actually be quite revealing. The original example wasn't mine. The original example was from Ted Hardy, who's the IETF's chair of the Internet Architecture Board, but he used it in a much more polite way than I did, so I apologize. So what this tells us is that these so-called smart devices aren't usually smart, but the data that they produce can be used in ways that are extremely revealing. So the question I think we need to be asking about the design of these devices is, where is the intelligence? Is it my device that is interpreting my speech here? Or is the device here recording my speech and sending it to a third party, and it's being interpreted elsewhere? And that was the case that you mentioned with the smart TVs. Yeah, they were recording the conversations, but the intelligence was on the server. So all your conversations weren't staying in the room, they were going to a third party. So again, it's that context violation problem that I described just before. Well, that kind of bugs me because, as I said, I'm old enough to remember personal computers with Intel 386 and 486 chips in, not powerful chips, much less powerful than your phone now. And there was voice dictation software for those PCs. Old Steam-driven PCs could do voice dictation. So why does this powerful device have to send that information somewhere else to be processed? It's not a technical decision. It's an economic one. They're sending it to the server because on the server they can mine it better. And that's a design decision. So again, the design decision tells us what values were applied to the design of that product. Okay, so having thoroughly depressed you, let me tell you some things that we're doing about this. Okay. One more, please. And one more. Okay. I used to think that technology was neutral and that it's what you do with the technology that is ethical. But actually, that's not the case. Every technology that we use has gone through a process of decisions about what that technology does and how it does it. Every one of those decision steps represents an ethical choice. Am I going to design the product to do things this way or that way? So no technology that we use is actually ethically neutral. They are all the consequence of a series of decisions, and at those decision points, ethical values can be applied. So the challenge to people developing IoT products and services is this. If you had to produce evidence of why you made the choices you made at each step in that design process, could you do it? Could you show, at this point, we had the option of doing the processing on the device or in the cloud. We chose the cloud because X. That's a pretty simple process to have to go through. But I think many manufacturers and vendors of services could not justify those choices if they were challenged to do so. And as I say, there are some really good resources on this. One book I mentioned in particular is by Sarah Spiekermann from the University of the Economics University of Vienna. And she's written an excellent book called Ethical IT Innovation, which applies this principle systematically to the development process. And it includes scenario planning, it includes exercises. It's a really excellent textbook. Thank you. Okay, one more. So I promised you two things that the Internet Society is working on to help address this. The first one is to talk a little bit about the IoT Trust Framework, which is done in collaboration with the Online Trust Alliance, which is part of the Internet Society, but consists of a community which has been contributing to online trust surveys and design advice for some years before they came into the Internet Society. So for the Trust Framework for IoT, the Online Trust Alliance convened a multi-stakeholder working group who spent 18 months coming up with a number of criteria for judging whether IoT devices are contributing to better trust. They looked at three areas. So the first one was security, second one was data privacy, and the third one was sustainability. Well, security and data privacy we've talked about today already, so I won't go into those. We'll talk about them as well tomorrow, I'm sure. Sustainability, why is that on there? Isn't that some kind of eco-hippie thing? Well, in a way it is, but think about the life cycle both of the devices and the data that the devices produce. At the moment, there's a temptation to treat connected devices and their data as disposable. Like if you have one of those, anyone have one of those electric toothbrushes where you replace the head of the toothbrush? And that's designed so you keep the handle and you have to keep buying expensive toothbrush heads. Yeah, but what do you do with them? Just throw them away. And they're plastic, so they're designed to be thrown away. So you have to buy new ones. That's not sustainable. And IoT devices, for cost reasons, are usually designed on the same principle, that you'll never fix that device if it breaks. You'll just buy another one and throw that one away. And when you come to replace your lamps or your home heating system, you won't upgrade the old devices. You'll throw them out and put new ones in. That's a basic design principle of much of the IoT equipment that we see. So sustainability is actually important here. First, ecologically, because those devices are being thrown away and they shouldn't be. Second, in terms of life cycle of the device. If you start out by thinking, this device may be in place for 15 years, then you start worrying about secure device update, secure decommissioning of the device at the end of its life. You start to worry about problems which you don't even care about if you think the device is going to be thrown away. What happens to the data that's on the devices that are thrown away? Pretty sure it's mostly still on there. And so someone is going around the refuse collection and recycling places, picking up IoT devices and taking data off them, I'm sure. Sorry, I said I wasn't going to depress you. Okay, can we move on? Okay. So just a little bit about those principles that working group defined. They actually came up with 93 to start with. And then we thought, well, no one's going to go through a 93-point checklist. So they whittled it down to 40 principles. And there will go on one more. And those 40 principles address 4 key areas. So security, access and credentials. How do the users actually authenticate to the device? In other words, how do you stop people accessing the device who shouldn't be accessing it? privacy, disclosures, and transparency. What is happening to the data? Where is it? Where's it going? And notification and best practice. When something goes wrong that the user ought to act on, how do they know? If your video camera suddenly starts streaming to somewhere else, can you find out? Does the device know? Is there anything that's checking that the device is streaming to the correct address? So how does the user find out? Is that a reliable notification? Could it be misused? Could someone spam the user with hundreds of messages saying, your security camera has turned itself on and off again. Your security camera has turned itself on and off again. What happens after that? After your camera has done that 800 times in a day? Most people are going to turn the camera off. So if someone can spam you with messages that aren't reliable about what's happening to your IoT devices, they may cause you to behave inappropriately. So even in that area, that apparently simple area of notification, those notifications have to be trustworthy and reliable. So next one. So to wrap up, I'd like to mention one more project that we're doing. And this is based on providing consumers with clear advice at the point of choice. Is this device a trustworthy IoT thing, or do we not know? And move on. Actually, we'll go past that one. Okay, so no, actually, we'll go past that one as well. Okay, so this is based on a simple model that when someone walks up to a product on the shelf in a retail environment, there are small things that can give them clear information about what kind of product they're buying. You've probably already seen this with things like fair trade products or energy-saving light bulbs. There's a badge on the product that says something about that product. Well, the badge is there so that you can make a quick decision at the point of choice when you're going to buy that product or another one. But the badge means nothing unless it has something underneath. So the badge has to stand for a set of clear principles about ethical, privacy-enhancing, secure design and use of that product. And from seeing the badge and thinking, oh, I wonder what that funny symbol means, the user has to be able to quickly find out, these are the principles for which that badge stands. Okay, well, if I want to save the rainforest, I should buy this kind of chocolate and not that kind of chocolate. Yeah? So those principles must be easy for the user to understand. So when they see the trust mark, they know what it stands for. But of course, that's no use if someone just put the mark on the product and put the principles on their website. You need something underneath that. So underneath that, you need processes for accreditation, for assessment of the company and its product to check that they're really doing what the product says. And those need to be backed up by internal policies and processes in that organization to make sure that they are actually putting the principles into practice. So that's the general approach of a trust framework. And we were very happy last year to be able to work with Consumers International, as Dawit said earlier, who have enormous reach through their member organizations to consumers across the world, to help design a trust mark like this, to help define what principles it should stand for, and to think about which products it would make sense to test as test cases for this idea. So that work is going on. We've got a list of products that we're going to have tested by independent testing labs, and we hope to have some interesting and exciting news about that in the course of this year. So, yeah, I think Kevin says that's time. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Robin. That was very interesting. So now we open to questions from the floor.
This is the fantastic thing about having the session after lunch. Sooner or later, everyone dozes off, including me, actually.
There's a question at the back. Please
Yep.
introduce yourself.
Vous pouvez poser les questions en français si vous voulez. Ça m'intéresse.
Thank you for the nice presentation. Thomas Kent from INSA. As I understand from your presentation that the framework mainly works for the consumer-based IoTs. Will it work for critical infrastructure IoTs, or are there any options to use for such infrastructures? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good question. If I'm totally honest, this framework did not start life as an IoT trust framework. It actually started life as an ethical data framework. So my idea was that a website or a service would have a trust mark with principles relating to the ethical treatment, the ethical processing of data. As it happened, just as I was finishing the research for that piece of work, the IoT campaign started, and that seemed to be a very appropriate vehicle for the same set of principles. So a trust mark, principles underneath, and then a process for making sure that it's meaningful. So I think the answer is yes, this can be applied. This approach can be applied to other things. Now, one of my other roles in ISOC is that I'm a board member of an organization called Kantara, which is it's another non-profit organization. It specializes in assurance for digital identity. So Kantara has a scheme like this with a trust mark, with a set of principles, and with accreditation and assessment processes, which is aimed at identity providers. And if an identity provider has a Kantara trust mark, you know that they have asserted a set of principles about how they manage and secure those identities, and you know that they've been audited against those principles. Now, in some instances, I would say that identity, particularly national identity, is a critical infrastructure component. So, for example, in the United States, there's an enormous infrastructure for government-issued IDs, and they have issued standards based on ISO and US standards. 863 is the US standard number, and you can be assessed against those by Kantara accredited assessors. So in that case, this is dealing with government-issued IDs, which again I would argue are definitely a critical infrastructure component. So I think it is applicable there. I think it's applicable in other places as well, such as procurement and supply chain management. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Robin. Any other question or comment from the floor? Okay. Okay, so just to reiterate what Robin has covered is there is a framework that could be used at policy level to structure what type of devices can come in and also help consumers identify some of these trustworthy devices through the trust mark. And, you know, as in the next session, we're going to hear what Senegal are doing in terms of a collaborative approach into IoT policy. But this framework document is available on our website. If you go to internetsociety.org/OTA, you'll see you'll find the OTA framework document, and it's in English and French. And it's a very, very good document. Whether you're a non-technical person or a technical person, it covers all the aspects of IoT security. So I would really encourage you to read it. And if you're in policy formation, it's a very good guideline that you could use to know what you should have in your policy towards IoT. So if there are no further questions, I think we can stop here for this session. Please join me in a round of applause. I have a question. Very good. Yes.
Just a quick question to ask: at what stage this kind mark is developed? Is it fully developed or is it still under development?
So bits of it are fully developed. So we've, as I say, we've been working with Consumers International on what form the trust mark could take. That sounds really silly. It sounds like it's just a logo, but actually there are many ways you can make that work. If you think of other places where trust marks are used to give consumers information, things like fair trade or sustainable forestry or sustainable fishing, that's just one sign. But when you have something like energy efficiency for devices, it's often a much more complicated trust mark. It may have red, green, and yellow bars that tell you how much energy it consumes. The same sort of thing happens with car tires, automotive tires. Those are rated for, I think, 4 or 5 things. You know, how good are they in the rain? How many seasons do they do? How noisy are they? How hard are they? And so the trust mark for those, the equivalent, is quite a complicated thing. So we've been working with them on the design of the trust mark itself. I think we're just going to use the principles that we have in the IoT framework because we have those. And then it's going to be a process of recruiting and qualifying the assessors, giving them the credentials to say, I'm qualified to inspect IoT devices. So we haven't done that bit yet, but a step towards that is to have some devices tested by independent product testing labs.
So is the certification developed?
Not yet, no.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
But I mean, having said that, we've, like I say, from the Kantara initiative experience, we have, Kantara has frameworks for accrediting assessors. So this is not completely new territory, but that's a body of work about how to certify someone as an identity accredited assessor. And this needs to be transposed into a different world now.
Thank you, Robin. Any other questions or comments? Personally, I'm really looking forward to the work on the trust mark. It will help, also me as a user identify an IoT device that's, gone through some sort of checks, and, help me decide as a consumer, should I buy this smartwatch or that smartwatch? Should I buy that smart camera? Should I buy this smart camera with a trust mark? And actually, just to mention something that was mentioned in the first presentation on Nest. If you Google Nest, if you go on the internet and see the product Nest, it's actually a product that was sold and it had a microphone, but this information was not included when you bought it. So it's only when people bought it as a web camera that they found out this thing actually had a microphone and it was recording conversations as it was happening. It's very interesting, but just Google for the Nest IoT camera, you'll find a very interesting article on that. So, we hope you found this session informative. Please join me in congratulating the panelists for the presentations they've made.